May it be a light for you in dark places when all other lights go out.
Hey guys, DCHL Devin here, and welcome to another How to Play and How to Buy video. And today, I wanted to go ahead and talk to you about the Dul Guldur faction, or Dark Powers of Dul Guldur, as it's officially called. So, in this faction, we actually get to deal with a couple of the new race, teleporting race, and a lot of different style orcs, and even the Necromancer himself. If you guys know from the movies, this is actually the faction that Gandalf had to deal with when he was captured in the dungeons. So let's go ahead and get right into it. First, let's go ahead and talk about the pros of this faction. So one of the big things is they actually have access to two different types of orcs. They have the Gundabad orc, the highly armored ones, and then they have the hunter orcs. Now, the distinction between these two is actually quite extreme. One of them actually has 2 attacks, and they have the same exact fight value of 3, but the other one has 1 attack and then a really high defense of 6. So it really goes down into what kind of style do you prefer. Me personally, I think this faction does work best with the 2 attack version, the hunter orcs. However, the fact that you have the different types does give you a little bit of flexibility in that sense. Do you want to be Gondor? Do you want to be like Corsair Reavers, I guess? So, or more kind of edge toward that direction. So I do like that a lot. It also has a little bit of mobility with its wargs and hunter orcs mounted on wargs, so it does have a cav option, which is always nice. The cav models are actually one of the few in the game that actually, if you dismount them, they almost feel like they're stronger in some ways. So it's always nice to know that even if you get dismounted by a hurl or something like that, your models stay pretty strong. Also, as far as the race of Dul Guldur, that is another fantastic option this army has, and the real key to them is that no one really knows how to handle them, or at least not very many players know how to handle them. In the hands of an expert, they can actually confuse a lot of new players on what they're doing. They also offer range of options and mobility, some of them teleporting in various different ways, even without dying. Their ability to teleport when they die, though, is actually more of a boon than anything else. And by the way, if you guys don't know, when I say teleport, essentially when they die, you leave a marker there, and then in the next turn, during priority, you roll a dice, and on a 3-up, they come back into play somewhere within 6 inches of where that marker was, allowing you to get into the back ranks, attack wizards, jump around and stuff. So a lot of times you'll find people often try to shield against the wraiths in order to prevent them from actually dying, because killing them sometimes is a pain in the butt. And one of the last pros about this army is the Necromancer himself. So the Necromancer is in this faction. The faction bonus makes him a little bit stronger, adding another dice to any time he casts a spell, which means most spells he wants to cast, he can generally just only throw 1 dice at it because it'll jump to 2, and he needs a 4-up on a majority of his spells, with the exception of Chill Soul. So he's actually one of the most versatile spellcasters in the game. Recently, as of the There and Back Again book, he just got 2 new spells, Your Staff is Broken and Curse. I would say Your Staff is Broken is probably one of the better spells for him to get, now making him threatening to wizards and ring raise alike. So he's kind of that multi-option where he can deal with almost every spellcaster in the game, and that is great about him. Also, he's capable of taking out entire chunks of the opponent's army by himself. This is something that it's his Chill Soul spell. If you channel it, he can deal a Strength 5 hit to everything within 3 inches of the target. And that is, I mean, against the right armies, against things like dwarves and such, it's probably not even really all that special. But against most other armies, elves and goblins and whatever, he can wipe out massive chunks of an army, especially cavalry, since he deals a Strength 5 hit to both the mount and the rider. So with all these in mind, you're talking about an army that actually does have some surprising amount of mobility despite its mostly infantry-based force. It does have a heavy magic user, and also has heroes that are actually quite annoying to deal with, and a lot of people really don't know how to deal with them. I would say even though they're kind of been out for a while, they're kind of rare still because the models just came out as of the recording of this video, I think only a month ago. So, or a few months ago. So let's talk about the cons of this army. Number one, you have limited ranged options, which is not to say you don't have any range. The problem is that you have only orcs with bows, which is a 5-up shooting, and they have 18-inch range, and they have strength 2 bows. So it's some of the worst shooting in the game. However, that's not to say you shouldn't have any shooting. I would actually recommend maybe taking about 12 bows or such. The reason why is not so you can actually kill things through shooting, but so that way you can drag the opponent to you if you need to. Sometimes it's not fun to be the only army that can actually shoot. Let's say, for instance, if you play against Rohan. Rohan is capable of moving about your speed and then just constantly shooting at you, meaning that if you can't take down their hero's horse at a range, then you have really no answer. You're just sort of chasing them around the field with heroic marches and whatnot as best you can, unless you have the lingering shadow or some cav of your own. But even with some cav of your own, they're just going to take taken out. So against heavy cav armies, Rivendell Knights being another great example, you want maybe about 12 bows so that you can shoot their commander off their horse and slow them down to his pace. It just will allow the move and shoot tactics to kind of stop. So now, that being said, they also have no access to Fury. Now, they do have a Warhorn. So the Hunter Orcs for 30 points can get a Warhorn, which will raise their courage to 3. I actually would recommend this because you really don't want this army to fail courage tests all the time. It's a kind of a frustrating thing about them is their courage 2 drop to 1. So if you happen to be around Harbinger, so if you happen to be fighting a fell beast, then you're going to have a lot of difficulty trying to actually charge the thing. This is one of the other reasons that I do recommend Hunter Orcs, because every single time you get a Hunter Orc in a contact, that's actually technically 2 models. You have 2 attacks you can kind of throw at the opponent. Having a couple spearmen thrown in actually helps with that, but otherwise, yeah, it's a con. You don't have access to Fury, and therefore you courage tests get a little bit annoying to pass. You also have no bodyguard unit or anything else like that in order to mitigate that. But then again, I guess Evil doesn't have bodyguard. So next, you have some kind of basic cav models that are a little overpriced. This is not necessarily probably intended this way, but it will discourage you from playing an army of them. They're slightly overpriced a little bit, but when you do pick them, I would still pick a couple, but you're not going to have that heavy mobility. Oftentimes, I actually will forgo the cavalry entirely and just pick the wargs. They have fell wargs as an option in their army. And I just pick a few of them just to go capture objectives and do a couple things, maybe like reconnoiter and stuff like that. And then lastly, all your bonuses, all your best bonuses are tied to the Necromancer. Now, this is kind of an issue as well. The Necromancer is 250 points. Now, he has 2 abilities that kind of get tied in with him. One, the army faction bonus itself is tied to him, so if you're not willing to pay his price tag, you might as well ally. There's almost no point because you're going to lose your faction bonus anyway. So that's problem number 1 with that. Number 2 is his other bonus that's really good, where he upgrades the resurrection of the race to a 2-up, requires him to be played in combination with 75-point Wraith heroes, which means that your army starts to get unusually small if you pick too many Wraiths. I've found the sweet spot is about 2 Wraiths with a Necromancer, but even then your army is really small, and I haven't found to be that effective. Some people try the just 6 Wraiths with Necromancer. Obviously, I'm talking about like 700 points in this kind of aspect. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but it hasn't seemed to do too well. I think like 3 of those armies showed up the Warhammer World GT recently, and I never saw any of them near the top that I know of. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one in the comments section. But yeah, it is a problem that, not a problem, but it is kind of a weakness that like everything's tied to him. Whereas if you look at other examples, like so for instance, Azog's Legion, their bonus is just tied to your army leader. So it doesn't matter who you pick, it's just tied to your army leader. But in this one, it's tied directly to the Necromancer himself. So if you don't pick the Necromancer, you might as well ally. So with that getting into said, let's go into a few tactics. There's a couple ways I've seen to actually play this force effectively. Number 1, you can just ignore the Necromancer entirely. Play maybe 2 or 3 Wraiths, get just a ton of Hunter Orcs, maybe about 24 of them, get a little bit of the Gundabad Orcs, mostly so you can do some shielding options, maybe get some spear supports in there, just give you a little bit of flexibility, throw in a couple Wargs for that mobility or Warg Riders, and then there you go. So the other way I've seen it is, of course, like I said, the Necromancer with 6 Wraiths. I haven't seen that, as mentioned, do extremely well, but I have heard that there's ways to make that competitive. If you're going to pick the Necromancer, another way I might go about it is just go ahead and forego the Resurrection ability entirely. Pick Hunter War Captains and start to spam out a little bit. They do have Hunter War Captains as an option, which is great because they're only 45 points, giving you a little bit more flexibility in your numbers. Maybe pick one Wraith, maybe like the Lingering Shadow or something like that. So oftentimes you're going to find that the biggest tactical decision you're going to face is more what race are you picking. Since you have 9 different options all doing a wide different array of abilities, that's often the big debate. So with what race do you pick? If you pick the Necromancer and if you don't pick the Necromancer, your answers might be entirely different. Personally, I prefer the wraiths that offer a degree of mobility. So we're talking about the Lingering Shadow and the Abyssal Knights. These 2, or actually really 3 wraiths offer a range of options that a lot of newer players are not expecting, or even like players who've been in the game for a while really just don't expect. For instance, you can do bizarre things like with the Abyssal Knights especially, you can split them up. One of them goes and grabs a prize or an heirloom or whatever, and then he teleports to his friend all the way across the field. Another tactic a lot of people have done is to pick one of them as your general and the other one is not. So your general sort of runs away, or maybe tries to keep himself at a distance so your opponent can't wound him or anything like that. And if he gets too close, well, he just pops back to the other one, and it kind of like creates an option where they really have to chase both of them in order to grab your general rather than just one. That's something that a lot of people do. I've seen as far as maybe you have options in like Reconnoiter, being able to cover 2 parts of the field with these hopping wraiths, so that way you can bring might to where you need it. So we say one spends all his might and you need it, then there you go, just pop the other one over to him. So they offer a wide degree of options as far as that is concerned. I even have seen them used kind of close up in combat. During the thick of combat, there would probably be some like areas where it's tough for one of them to get to and the other one's kind of getting around, so teleporting another in base contact, you even get an extra inch that way technically. So that plus the Lingering Shadow, he does move 3 inches. A lot of people have gamed it to about 3.9 inches is really kind of how far, because it doesn't say the base has to be wholly within the 3 inches. So a lot of people say, oh well, as long as you're kind of touching that 3-inch line, which is true against most of the game, like Nature's Wrath, and saying, oh, all your models during deployment must be within 6 inches of your army warband leader. Well, people kind of often say the same thing. It just has to touch that 6-inch marker. So 3.9, almost 4 inches, is really how far he teleports. But a lot of people aren't expecting his ability to teleport through walls and jump around. Also, if he gets relics or heirlooms and stuff like that, he is also difficult to track down due to his ability to hop during priority. He also causes problems for cavalry because he can hop forward into charge range when they weren't expecting that, and maybe even grab army leaders or something like that when they weren't planning for him to do so. So that's just 2 that I always pick. So moving away from those 2 wraiths, we got the Witch King is often nice for his 3 might, which means it's impossible to actually kill him on the first blow, even with an Elven Blade. If you guys don't know, Elven Blades reduce the resurrection roll. This is another great thing, of course, about the Abyssal Knights, by the way, is that they have Elven Blades, able to counter Elven Blades of the opponent. So another one I personally like to pick is the Slayers. The Slayers are great because they reduce numbers of the opponent. In this army, you really want to kill the opponent as fast as possible, because your Hunter Works, which I always recommend as my army staple, can be killed so fast. You really need to be able to kill your opponent before they can kill your models too quickly. The Slayers are fantastic for that. They can actually take out big units and stuff like that. As far as the the Dark Headsman, I would pick him if you have the Necromancer. So he's able to piercing strike with Reckless Abandon because the Necromancer keeps him in play all the time, reducing his defense to, let's say, 3, but then his strength boosts up to like 7, and it even can go two-handed if he even wishes for it to. So this is a great use for him. So those are some that I personally pick. I know there's some arguments for Kamul with 3 attacks and stuff like that. We could go on for a little while, but those are my personal preferences. But I'd love to hear what your preferences are. Which race do you actually pick? I can see the Kamul. Actually, I should mention for Kamul having 3 attacks, one of the problems that the race have is they only have 2 attacks. Now that might seem like a lot, since obviously we value the Hunter Works for that, but for a hero, that's actually not a whole hell of a lot. There's very often times where they lose fights, and very often times where they fail to kill, even the Slayers themselves, because they can only really throw 2 dice at the problem. So just be aware of that maybe a banner option is worth it in keeping around them, because they don't win fights as often as you would like them to because of their limited number of attacks. And fight value 5, let's face it, is about staple for most captains or low tier heroes in this game. So if you're going to use the Necromancer for his range spells, then one thing you want to do is plan out where you're going to bomb your opponent. It's always weird to say that. I'm not really sure who gave him the ability to blast 3 inches out, but great that he has it. Make sure you target areas where the opponent cannot resist with will. If you're going to spend a point of might, you do not want your opponent to be able to resist this spell. Not at all. You don't even want the chance of it. So go ahead and do your due diligence. Sap the will of everyone who can resist it, or target outside edges. If you see your opponent has a long line but put all his heroes in the center, we'll target the edge of that line, so that way you just get all the models up to the hero, making sure the hero is out of range of the spell, and just take out grips of his troops. This, in effect, is one of your ranged arsenal options in a realistic way. This is one way you can bring your opponent to you, because a lot of people are going to be afraid to have the Necromancer constantly dropping these things on your opponent. Now, granted, you can only drop 3 on them, but that's where we get into some ally options. Of course, you can pick the Taskmaster to try to increase that number of times. Now, as far as alliances go, if you're picking the Necromancer, I'd be hard-pressed to actually ally, because you lose a fantastic bonus. The ability to add an extra dice onto the roll is hard to give up. But if you don't have the Necromancer, then I would pick a Shade or Kardesh. Kardesh, because you want a Shaman who is able to get his will back if someone saps it, and the Shade because it reduces one of the few problems the Hunterworks have, which is their low fight value. They often will lose fights quite a bit. The Shade brings your fight value to an effective 11, which is fantastic to destroy the enemy, because you already have 2 attacks at strength 4. You're going to kill most of the things that you win up against, and granted, you can also feint on top of that if your opponent's a higher fight, which most often they would be. So that is pretty much a lot of ways that you can play the Force that I've seen and I've actually played myself. As far as how to buy these for under $100, now usually this actually gets a little bit tough with the newer factions, because the newer factions are under a lot of those resin models and such like that from Forge World, and or maybe even the Finecast models. Luckily in this case, we don't have to deal with that as much. We're talking about a pack of Wraiths will only run you about $44. And by the way, guys, I'm American, so of course I'll talk in the sense of dollars, but that translates to about 32 pounds as of the recording of this video. So $44 will get you the Wraiths, and then you can get the Hunterwork packs. Now, the Wraiths come in packs of 3, and although technically each Wraith is a specific Wraith, I don't think most opponents will mind you proxying too much. Maybe not at a high-level tournament like Articon or Warhammer World GT, but in most casual games, each Wraith kind of looks alike for most players. So you can just buy 3 and kind of stick with them until you have the money to move forward. After that, I would start with the Hunterworks. Now, there are Gundabad orcs for $65 for 12, but at that point you're done. So I would recommend starting with the Hunterworks at $35. Now, why they're cheaper? It's just the cost of the material, guys. One's made of resin, one's made of plastic. So otherwise, the amount of models in the box isn't dictating the price here. But then again, that's sort of GW style. So I would pick 2 boxes of Hunterworks and then one of these boxes of Wraiths. I would leave it up to you to pick whichever one you want as far as the Wraiths are concerned. They all look awesome. They have them right now in more of a static pose. I've heard in the future they're going to do more dynamic poses, so I'm looking forward to seeing those come out. But anyway, guys, if there's anything I missed, certainly let me know, and let me know what faction you want me to review next. And I will see you guys very soon.